I return after a very busy 2 weeks that were filled with a lot of unfortunate events to review Disney's Bright. Based off the trailer, Onward looked like it was going to be a fairly wholesome though incredibly predictable film a la most Pixar movies. And for the most part, that's exactly what this is. I think the level of emotional reaction people have to this is going to vary a lot based on how much you can personally relate to the characters and their situation. The characters all function as decently relatable on a basic level, but the specific struggle of growing up without a father figure or just missing a parental figure from your life will change from person to person. Because outside of that one factor going for it and the more unique way that they resolved it at the end, Onward is very generic and kind of average. The characters are all very tropey and stereotypical. You have the awkward skinny kid who needs to learn to have confidence in himself, the larger, dumber older brother who acts like a goofball to the dismay of the awkward character, the mom who is very protective of her children and has a kick-butt side to her when it comes to keeping her kids safe. And these are all functional, but they're not very imaginative and they don't do much to change those typical formulas very much. That's why I think some people won't feel this movie on as deep a level as others, because the characters just aren't that deep, so you don't feel for them as much unless you just happen to feel the strife that they have of their father figure being gone. Ideally, a movie should make you care so much about a character or characters that no matter their problems, you feel for them. Onward is almost the opposite of this. It relies more on you caring about their father being absent for you to care about the characters. And like I said, that's not going to resonate as well with everyone because not everyone has as deep of a personal connection to that. For me, this has already been very forgettable, and that's not to say that the movie is automatically bad because of this, but most Pixar movies, even if you can see the resolutions coming a mile away, make a very strong connection with their audience and leave lasting impressions through their character work. Onward just didn't do that, at least for me, and the character work isn't as strong here. And it does have more to do with just the characters and their struggles. The plot is weak in some aspects and it doesn't always know exactly what kind of movie it wants to be, and the joke I made earlier comparing this to Bright wasn't just because of the modern fantasy connection. The world this takes place in feels very manufactured and the world building is incredibly unrealistic to the point that it was taking me out of the movie. Onward is still better than Bright, mainly because 1, Onward isn't trying to take itself as seriously as Bright did, and 2, Onward doesn't have god-awful racial coding that Bright tried to pull off. But it does have the same issues in terms of world building. Lindsay, Ellis, a much larger and much better YouTuber than I, made an excellent essay explaining just how bad the world building in Bright was. I will link that video below in the description. But at one point she talks about how there are a couple of lines written as jokes for the purpose of making the world seem relatable to ours that would make absolutely no sense due to the foundations of the world being different. The main thing that stuck out to me like this in Onward was the shot of a mermaid in a kiddie pool in the front lawn of a suburban neighborhood. Even in a modern, like ours, world, why on earth would a mermaid be living in the suburbs? Just like in Bright, it's meant to be a joke, but not in a meta visual gag kind of way. It's supposed to make the audience giggle, like, aha, they're just like us. But they did it in a way that, well, it's less funny and more confusing. How does this mermaid get in and out of the kiddie pool? How do mermaids function in a land-based society at all? Is her house just like the other houses in the neighborhood? If so, how does she live in that at all? And I am not saying that this stuff needed to be explained or answered in the movie. I'm just saying it shows a lack of care into the world, and the writers were more concerned with just making the universe as close to ours as it possibly could, without taking time to consider how these elements could or would realistically work in a more modernized world. I have a very similar gripe with the way magic plays out in the movie and what the movie says versus what it actually shows about magic, but that's going to be more for spoiler talk, so sideline that for just a second. The animation all looks good and it's all well done. Nothing about it stood out as particularly spectacular. It looks like a standard Pixar film, which isn't a bad thing. It's just nowadays we see creators being more and more creative and innovative with their visual styles. That stuff like Onward only looks more standard, even if it is technically very well done. There was one part in the movie though where Ian, the main character, had like something written on his hand and he went to smudge it and his skin stretched like rubber, and it was so jarring to me for a second, because then all I wanted to do for the whole movie was reach into the screen and grab him and stretch him out to see how far I could get him to go. I have no idea what material they used or what rigging they did to make that happen, but it was hilarious to me. To sum it up, this is a pretty generic but decently done film overall. It's kind of hard to describe because most things most, the world building doesn't count here, aren't horrible or terrific. They are just very standard and typical. The characters are stereotypical but still have some heart and charisma to them. The plot is very basic but has a unique resolution. This is something I can see all ages enjoying, though how it came out, it seems to be more geared towards a younger crowd, and it really doesn't have to be. This movie with a rewrite or two and just some tweaks in the right places would have really elevated it, but as is, it just stays firmly in generic territory. I think this will at least be worth giving a try, especially for people who might relate to the premise of not having a father figure, but I wouldn't go in expecting Pixar's best because this isn't. It's a good movie to take your kids to if you have them, and I went and saw it alone and didn't hate myself, so there's that. Oh, and I guess I may as well mention the first Disney LGBT character, even though I am almost positive that I have read that headline several times for other films, but whatever. It's a character that's in the movie for 2 minutes and she makes one reference to her girlfriend's daughter. On one hand, it's nice to see it just kind of used casually, but knowing it's from Disney, and they always do this stuff by design to be easily changed or edited for release in other countries, just makes it so freaking shallow. And it wouldn't be as bad if they didn't act like they deserved a pat on the back for doing what other companies and writers have been doing better for years. So if you read that headline and you really thought this was going to be a great LGBT rep movie, it's not. Don't get your hopes up. Alright, so we are going to be in spoiler territory from here on out. Let's start by talking about the way magic is talked about and then the way that it is used in this movie. The opening narration mostly shows magic used in very mundane ways that were all replaced with technology, which in theory, yes, that works. Magic died out because it was harder to use than technology, but from this point on, the movie gives us every reason as to why magic never should have died out, given the things that you can do with it. First off, the very premise of this movie is that the main characters could bring their father back from the dead, even if it were temporary. That isn't something technology has done yet, I think, unless I am way out of a loop here. We see the boys use a disguise spell, a floating spell, a destruction spell, shrinking and growing spells. These are all things that would have very practical or unique uses even in a world more like ours, and I find it incredibly hard to believe that everybody would just collectively say, nah, we're good. They mentioned in the opening narration that magic was quote-unquote hard to master, hence why people preferred technology, and yes, even our main character struggles with learning his spells. Kind of. But I'd like to remind everyone that the events of this movie take place over 24 hours, and by the end of this 24 hours, Ian is practically a master wizard, and he's being guided by nothing but his brother who played this movie's version of D&D. We see that some people can't use magic and some people are born with the gift of it, but with what we have seen that magic can do, and how easy it seems to be able to learn despite what the movie is trying to tell me, I don't believe for a second that it wouldn't be a thing at all anymore. It's just so confusing as to why magic is dead and gone in this universe. And I think it goes back to, if it weren't dead and gone, then the writers would actually have to consider the impacts on its universe. And I just don't think they wanted to do that. They wanted to make a world as close to ours as possible. Our world doesn't have magic, so they needed to find an excuse to axe it. And the excuse they came up with makes no sense and is really lazy. Also, a note, this is like a side tangent, but anyways. The growing shrinking spell is mentioned to be temporary and wears off, but if that were true, then that splinter that Ian grows into a new staff should have shrunk back down at some point, but it never does. That is a nitpick, yes. Moving on. Also, apparently a lack of magic extends to pixies not being able to fly because I guess they have to use magic to fly. This isn't something that's even based on using spells. It seems like something that is physiological to their existence. And then they're about to get squished on the ground and die, and suddenly their magic is back and they fly now, despite no pixies flying for a very long time, apparently. That made me roll my eyes so hard because it was just trying way too hard to show how there is zero magic now, despite it still being something that would be super convenient, to the point that the characters in this movie are insane for not using it. You may ask why I care so much about all of this. This is a huge issue for immersion in the film, because you started off with the opening narration at the very beginning of the film that was meant to establish the universe and the role magic played in it. And once these rules were set, every time throughout the film that something was contrary to these rules or the explanations given in the beginning, all I could think was, well, that doesn't make any sense with what we were told at the beginning. And that is happening constantly in this movie. It is so hard to get invested in the story when I am just being reminded every 5 minutes how little all of it makes sense. Decent world building? We don't know her. And to go back to the pixie thing real quick, quick, that whole scene felt really out of place. First off, he gives off on trying to grow the can after one attempt, and this all leads to an out of place action scene, which is what I meant earlier when I said this movie doesn't always know exactly what it wants to be. The final action scene works better, and it makes more sense, but this one really could have been cut and it wouldn't have changed a thing about the movie. And it all culminates in a lesson that it is okay to dangerously merge through traffic if you're about to miss your exit. Remember that one, kids. The action, let alone a car chase, didn't have a good place here, and it just added a few minutes to the runtime and gave me a mini headache because of that stupid pixies can actually fly thing. Later on, the plot also does that very cliche thing where two main characters who are friends or close to each other suddenly have a conflict in the middle of the movie or the third act to give big emotions when they make up and hug at the end. Onward handled this a lot better than how I've seen other movies do it, so it is not a huge gripe there. It was just like another cliche thing that I noticed happened on top of everything else cliche in this film. Also, I'd like to point out that even though the legs of the dad are blind, like they have no eyes at all, and several times we see him walk into things or off of things, and there are other times where the legs will walk like right up to in front of the two boys and then just stop, and then like kind of tap the foot around like they're looking for something. But it's like clearly he just stopped right in front of them. That's just a detail that relates back to immersion, and it was really hard to not notice when it happened. Overall, I did really like the finale. I thought that it was odd that with as much knowledge as Barley had about magic and quest, he never thought that there might be a curse and thing to prepare. He immediately identified it as a curse when he saw it, but I guess the thought just never came to him beforehand. But beyond all that, the more unique thing about this movie is its resolution and how our main character never actually gets to see the dad that he always wanted, but instead sacrifices that to give his brother the time to say the goodbye that he never got to. This was the one thing that I actually really liked, and it helped keep this movie from being completely predictable. And it has a good lesson that you should appreciate who you have in your life and who helps you instead of being fixated on the idea of a person that, even if unfortunately, never got to be there for you. The ending is what I think has made a lot of people really like this movie. It's the part with the most heart, the most unique ideas, and it is what sticks with people the most after the movie is over. I just wish the ending was given a better setup. And I cannot express enough how bad the world building is in here. I would love to see something that does like a really great blend of magic and modern technology, and not in the sense that like the magic world is hidden away from our world, but a really good consolidation of both. If you know anything that does that well, please let me know about it. The only thing I can think of that does that like somewhat is Saga, and everything else has dropped the ball on that idea from what I have seen. But outside of the world building, most of the things about this movie are fine. They don't try to do anything unique or out of the box, but it makes the gears turn. Seems like a lot of potential went unanswered, but that all relates back to the writers not putting the time into bettering the script and considering how all of these elements it has would impact the universe. It is an incredibly okay movie overall, and that is the best summary that I can give of it. Alright, so a small channel update before the outro. Yes, I am behind on reviewing Clone Wars Season 7. I am very sorry about that. The last 2 weeks have been awful for me in terms of art and videos, but I promise a video will be coming out before Friday that will be a joint review of episode 2 and 3, and then we'll be back on schedule for reviewing episode 4 and so on. But be sure to let me know what you think about Onward and how you think it stacks up. Feel free to start a discussion in the comments below. If you like this video, you can give me a thumbs up, and if you really like it, you can subscribe, maybe hit the bell. If not, it is all good, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.